Robert, the Crystal Palace Park, it's one of those London parks that I only visit about once every 5 or 10 years. And I really enjoyed coming to see it this morning in September. And I was dazzled by your knowledge of its history. You've lived near it for a while. In terms of features, what's good about the Crystal Palace Park?
Much of what's good about the way that it's inherited from the 1850s, from Paxton's day, vegetation, composition, views, and what could be described as an educational ethos.
I agree. And behind that is Paxton's design idea, which I believe he took from Repton and Loudon, which was the classic 19th century park and garden strategy of having a major building, normally a country house, but the Crystal Palace here, and then a terrace, which was the domain of art and people near to the building, and then a middle ground, which was a serpentine, Brownian English landscape park, and there is a section there which is called the English Garden. And then the third stage was the background, which is the view out into Kent, which was, in Burke's terms, intended to be sublime. And Paxton did that, and it was wonderful. But behind Paxton, I always see Loudon's mantle. I always imagine that, because Paxton started work at about the age of 19, and he must have read Loudon's Encyclopedia of Gardening, which appeared in 1822, and in which Loudon wrote, "Suppose, for example, a man desires to be a king. That is a desire sufficiently extraordinary, but he may very likely attain his object. Let no young gardener, therefore, who reads this, even if he can but barely read, imagine that he may not become eminent in any of the pursuits of life. To desire and apply is to attain, and the attainment will be in proportion to the application." I think that that's what Paxton read, and he thought, I'll do it. And when we look back at him, he did it. And the best example is the Crystal Palace. So we agree entirely about what's good. But what about what's not so good about it? Because I must admit that walking around today, when I arrived at the station and I walked to the avenue and then back to the museum, by the time I got to the museum, I was depressed. What's wrong with the Crystal Palace Park?
It's marginal administratively. It's on the edge of Bromley. It's not funded on a metropolitan basis, unlike, say, the Lee Valley Regional Park Authority. And yet it is a metropolitan park. It's designated. However, in the middle of it, rather like a donut, the great area has been taken out of the park to become the National Sports Centre, developed by London County Council and then the Greater London Council.
Absolutely agree that it's a metropolitan facility, and like the Lee Valley Regional Park, it ought to be funded by all of London. The Lee Valley Park continues to level the equivalent of a precept on all the London boroughs, and that's what the Crystal Palace needs. And I agree with you about the National Sports Centre, which the architects plonked right in the middle, killing the transitional design that I mentioned. It was a terrible thing to do, and it's killed the park in many ways.
It was understandable to plonk it in the middle, because that was a great tradition of recreation and sport at Crystal Palace. The FA Cup used to be played there in the 1890s, W.G. Grace's London County Cricket Club played on the cricket ground, and then in the 50s and 60s it was used for motor racing. It's still used sometimes for motor racing and for cycle racing. So that isn't a foreign idea. It was maladroitly implemented.
And it's remediable, because they could easily open up the axis right through the centre and the view from the terraces to the sublime background. At present, though, it's blocked by trees, actually. There's an avenue on both sides with car parking on one side of it and a very fine avenue on the other side, but they're blocked. It's amazing.
We have to criticise the London County Council and the GLC. They did not appreciate historic parks. That was their policy.
Well, the reason may well be that they employed parks managers who'd been trained in mowing machines and floral bedding and architects, and they didn't employ designers, landscape architects, with an appreciation of what the Crystal Palace represented.
So we can argue that we need landscape architects.
Yeah, that's right. They need landscape architects, but they've had them, haven't they? They've employed 2 really excellent firms.
But not implemented a single tree.
Remind me of the 2 schemes.
There was the Peter Latz scheme, which is the most recent one, and then before that there was Kathryn Gustafson's scheme.
They couldn't have found 2 better firms. So they did absolutely the right thing, but nothing came from them. Why not?
Supposedly because of finance. In fact, the finance was available for the latest scheme. There was a heritage lottery funding, but the Greater London Authority, in other words, Boris Johnson and Bromley Council, were seduced by the ideas of a Chinese developer, and you can judge their ambition by looking at their website. Zongnong.
I think that Bromley did exactly the right thing. I think it was in 2012 when they decided to hand over the management of the Crystal Palace to a trust, and they set up a shadow trust, and it's coming into operation this year. Originally, it was a commercial organisation with philanthropic intent that managed the park. I think they went bankrupt. It was taken over by the LCC and then Bromley. And so it switched from being a commercial project to being a private project, and neither was really a success. And so a non-profit trust has the potential to merge both approaches and to do a much better job than either of them on their own.
It is worth recording, however, that thanks to Greater London Authority monies, there has been the reconstruction, restoration of the sphinxes and also of some of the dinosaurs.
Yes, they're right to give priority to that, because restoring what they've got takes priority over trying to introduce new facilities. The comparator I always think of is the Tivoli Garden in Copenhagen, which was the same kind of project as the original Crystal Palace Park, in that there was an entry fee and it was commercial. And the Tivoli Garden survived, and nothing of the equivalent places in the UK did survive. I think that setting up a trust is slightly a step in that direction.
One of the things about Crystal Palace Park is that the Victorians set up superb transport connections. Both the low-level station, which is a line through to Victoria that is still open, and the high-level station, which was subsequently closed in 1953, had electric railway, so that 1911, was it, when the position was held there, you could get to Victoria Station in 12 minutes.
I hope it has a good future as a public-private project. The 2 commercial projects that we heard about this morning are a 2-storey cafe in the park, which should be profitable, and selling off, was it Paxton's Garden at Rockcliffe, that they wanted to sell that off for housing. I'm worried.
It was a travelling caravan park.
Sure. I'm a bit worried about that it seems to be disposing of park land, whereas the strip of grand villas that were put round Crystal Palace Park in the 19th century, rather as the Nash put the terraces round Regent's Park, in both cases, the architecture contributes to the landscape. And I'm a bit worried that the Rockcliffe housing project is just going to be a plot of land sold off to make money without contributing anything back to the quality of the park.
Ultimately, that depends on the nature of the developer and also on Bromley. And Bromley don't really have a good track record of fostering good architecture close to Crystal Palace Park.
I think Kathryn Gustafson, in her 1997 scheme, had the right idea in using it for a sort of, well, her idea was, I think it was a horticultural garden centre, market stroke exhibition ground. So it would be a bit like a sort of Chelsea flower show or Hampton Court flower show, but at the Crystal Palace. And I think that kind of exhibition ground for a fairly temporary use, which we increasingly see in the royal parks, and we see it on Blackheath as well. Well, we just had a pop concert 2 weeks ago on Blackheath for 3 or 4 days. The residents opposed it, but they didn't actually suffer very much. We live very near there, and it wasn't a big problem. And the Crystal Palace seems extremely suited to being an exhibition ground, and they could get in a lot of money without inconveniencing the public for any substantial period of time.
And particularly that would be a way of reconstructing the terraces and the site of the old building at the top, which is at present ruinous and unused largely. It's only used occasionally from time to time for fun fairs.
I think that it's fine to have commercial activities, providing something the public wants. It could be money, or it could be a garden, or it could be other kinds of facilities. So they shouldn't go back to the old days when you just have an entrance fee, and if you don't pay it, you can't get in. It should be that the public have always got access, but that you can get extra by paying something. I mean, one example that comes to mind is a restaurant. They work extremely well in the Tivoli Garden. And I don't see, and Greenwich is full now. Greenwich town centre is full of restaurants. I think they could easily have, without interrupting the park, some restaurants within it.
And indeed, we have a nice precedent for that, which is the cafe in the low-level station.
Yes, that's a big success, isn't it? And it's a pleasure to go into. I had coffee there this morning.
However, in addition to commercial facilities, there must be a concern by the charity for public goods and common goods. And I think the message we should get over is that it's financed London-wide.
Yes, it should be financed London-wide, and the finance should come partly from public bodies and partly from private organisations, and the big beneficiary should be the public, the people, the community.